this is the opportunity for us to round up any stragglers, any questions that you might have had during the day, or other questions you might have come to the session with. He said, looking at Caroline over there, posted the question with us a long time ago. And also for any of the panellists who might have had reflections of something that they thought, oh, I should have said that. And this is something, I'll remind you. So maybe the first thing to do is to say, do we have any questions that people have either from, that they've reflected on from the content of today, from any of the speakers, a general question that they're thinking of now that they'd like to put to the whole panel, or a question that they came with before today. Kieran?
Yes, I just wondered if any of the panelists had any comments on, I guess, the role of social media, growing role of social media in that middle age group. I think the role has completely changed in the last decade. The accessibility, even though I'm not sure what the rules are around access to Facebook below a certain age, but undoubtedly kids are getting on there earlier and earlier, forging the age gap question. I think for some they say it has, I've heard some say obviously the kind of materialistic, the kind of very superficial aspect of it does undermine real relationships and the truth about what's going on in the home life. But others have said it's a great communication tool, it's brought groups closer together. So I wanted to know if you and any of you had any sort of insight, specifically the Scandinavian model, if that was ever really discussed in other countries or in your research, if it had any sort of bite or conclusion either way.
Thanks, Kieran. Great question.
Well, I'll start with the positive and say that there's actually been some really lovely research being done with marginalised groups. In fact, there was one with young carers, but others with gay and lesbian young people, with young people from a whole range of different cultural backgrounds who actually feel a lot more connected online, and that the felt connectedness can be just as potent as real connectedness. So although we poo-poo the type of relationships that kids are developing online, there's actually some research that says the opposite is the case. It's not to say that those isolated kids shouldn't be supported to have real world interactions, but we need to put the caveat around it and say that actually some kids do quite well in that space. That social media is also now one of the key sources of information for young people and children in that age group as well, who are curious about a whole range of things, will jump online and not just look at the internet, but will jump on social media to find out about different things. The problem from a health promotion point of view is a lot of the information out there is garbage or done a little bit of stuff in the self-harm space. There are real concerns about young people with particular issues like self-harming that do connect up with other kids in the same situation and find it very difficult, particularly in the online environment, to be able to accurately judge. So we already know that kids often overestimate the extent to which their peers are engaging in problem behaviours. So if you ask kids, how often do people your age do this, that or the other, more often than not they'll say, oh, absolutely everyone else does this stuff. So we'll often change their behaviours so that they can do the same as the naughty girl in class. So there's a problem in that regard, but when you engage with children and young people and help them to be able to find the right information and to engage with the right social networks, it can be quite powerful and quite positive. But
I'll put the kind of educational thing and talking about my school. So firstly, it exists, and we're very about. A janitor actually once said to me, "No point going against the grain, Wendy. You only get splinters, right?" And I've held on to that gem. Go with, but craft and mould and shape. So it exists and accepted. And while we're very positive, we do always think about what could possibly go wrong. And then when you shoot yourself right out there, you think, right, So none of that's going to happen, and we know what we'll do if it does. Around the whole, social media fits for us in multimodal communication. It's fascinating that when we're talking about a literacy crisis, whatever that means, children are actually, I believe, and experience communicating all the time in multiple modes. This is a good thing. They're reading, thinking. Those learning assets that I shot up, you know, thinkers, researchers, communicators, collaborators, as users of any text or composers of any text, we're thinking about, is it good information? You know, there's a critical literacy lens that we put over what we've read, who's written it, what for, what agendas, all of those things. So there's this whole literacy arm going on. There's also another piece that's the protective behaviours work that we do. And absolutely everything, same thing applies in the real world as in the online world. And if you are feeling uneasy, what's your body doing? Heart's racing, getting hot, getting flustered. Who are the 5 people you might go to talk to about that? You know, so it's not really a separate issue. It's about communication and literacy for us, and accepting it will go on there. They need grown-ups, anchors, relationships to use it appropriately.
Do you think it can be used
I was going to say much the same.
as a tool by community organisations to engage with, or is that too invasive and too kind of distorting the social aspect of it?
I would say it depends. It depends. It depends on for whom, which family. So again, the design thing, we talk to a number of users and see who it would fit for and when. We use Google Apps for Education and Google Communities. My goodness, when you flip, if every family's going to be on their phones or whatever at night, well, look at our community mum. Look at what we did out there on the playground and on the mountain today.
For sure.
And I was also going to say that you have to do it well. And most social media engagement by agencies, be it community or government, isn't done well. Going back to the Scandinavian context, there's an EU project which has been around for many years across a lot of the Scandinavian countries, the Safer Internet Centres, which they run. They have programs in schools, they have a crisis line, a helpline, and they also run a whole bunch of sort of information programs. But in talking with them, one thing that they said, which echoes views I've held for quite a while, is that saying, well, when is it? The genie's out the bottle. It's there. We need to manage it, but we need to manage it based on evidence, and that so many times you hear people saying, "Oh, the sky's falling, young people doing this, or this is happening." It sometimes isn't, and a lot of it is just an older person going, "Oh, when I was young, it didn't happen, so therefore it must be wrong," because it's not done the same way. Generations have done that all the time, and it's really hard to differentiate between just because a young person is doing something differently. When is it differently and good? When is it differently and who cares? It's just different. And when is it differently and worse? And how are you assessing that it's worse? On whose frame of reference are you assessing that it's worse? And I think we've done a lot of things that are possibly beneficial or best neutral into the bad pile simply because it's not what we did when we were kids.
The other thing is, I mean, it's inevitable, it's here.
Yeah.
We deal with it. We had to deal with cars a century ago. We got used to dealing with cars more or less. The other thing is to me that it all comes back to the parents again and the messages they give and the way they support kids. In my situation, you see parents on the social network continually to the exclusion of their children. The child's walking along while the parent is dealing with the machine. It's more to say, can you please turn it off a quarter of an hour and actually look at your child and talk to them. And the message you're giving the child about this as being more important than they are is probably the most serious and concerning message of the lot.
Yeah.
And so it's really thinking about the messages you're giving as well as the messages they're getting and delivering, and just get to be competent using it as a tool and know its limits, and you need your grown-ups again.
Just to add one small thing on that, and I think, with the work that we did with children, that issue of parents using social media a lot and not doing other things because they were so distracted by social media was something children talked about. So that's the other side of the argument, as he says. With one group that we were working with, the girl made a suggestion that other children really liked was that in every community, in a place that children can access, there should be a suggestions box about what would make the community a better place, and a feelings box about how children are feeling about being in their community. And then we had, a lot of discussion about where that box would be, or where those boxes would be, so children can access them. But I think for that opportunity to get children's views in a very localised sense, social media can work really effectively there. So I think there are ways that it can be used in incredibly positive ways to give another opportunity to connect with children. It shouldn't be a replacement for the things we talked about, for physical places, for relationships. But I think, as everyone else has said, it's here. And I do think, it's been my observation with seeing young people across age groups using social media, that actually younger people are getting more and more sophisticated and understanding about using it because they're growing up with it. And so some of the alarmist concerns that were there sort of 10 years ago, I think young people are starting to sort out for themselves.
Two quick things. For Australian examples, Pip Collins and Michelle Blanchard from Inspire Foundation and the Centre for... Come to me. Mel have done a whole lot of work, but if you Google, or go on social media, Pip Collins and Michelle Blanchard, mostly in the mental health space, have looked at how services can better engage. They've found that it's actually a really useful tool, but then they did some studies with service providers and said that most service providers are 10, 15 years behind. And the problem is everyone's now going on to Facebook, but kids are thinking that Facebook's daggy and have moved on to Snapchat and everything else instead. So it's about us trying to keep up with the technology at the same time.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah, look, I think you gathered a really good mix of people here today, and look, you've all had great amounts of expertise. We've had people coming from a family perspective, people coming from a community perspective, a school perspective, which is really good. I'm really interested in this 24 hours a child sort of thing, and these kids cross over different sectors during their day. And I'm really interested in the interplay between these sectors, and coming from being a teacher one and then moving into the community sector, I can still honestly say, from my opinion, I don't know, I may be different from anyone else in here, but there's still not a real good interplay between schools and the community sector. The referral process, the transfer of information, even the provision of services from the community sector for young people in the Middle Ages, I still find it's quite complex. We have youth centres speckled around Canberra that sometimes 5 or 6 kids or 10 kids attend, and there's 1 million kids hanging out at the Hyperdome. That sort of stuff, and it's sort of, we've got good resources, we've got representatives in here from ACT Health, from Department of Education, from JACS, from CSD. We've got some resources here, but it seems to me as though it's all so compartmentalised that it's nearly a divide and conquer system to me. You mentioned there, Alasdair, about that school with the youthy centre-y, schooly sort of concept.
40,000 kids.
Yeah. Just throwing it out to you guys, what's some things?
Well, on the youth centre thing, I think if you had to choose between going with Dunlop Disney at any youth centre, I've worked in youth centres and stuff, it's a completely different ballgame. And Sweden, etc., who runs the Fushuk model, recommends that they throw money at them and do it in a respectful way. Then you will get young people who attend the centre, and that's one, it's a nice thing to do, but also it is a socially and economically sensible thing to do. Whereas I don't think we're anywhere near that kind of thinking in Canada or Australia. With youth centres stuck on out, you're lucky to get a pinball machine or a table tennis table with a rig net. Really hard-working, well-meaning workers, but they're struggling uphill in terms of resources. It's no wonder you get most of the kids hanging at the mall.
I used to think that schools as community hubs was all about, gosh, it would be great to have this social worker and this person and this person. I've totally rethought that about what school as a hub is, and again it comes back to the relationship stuff, and school as a mediator and connector. An example I use, it's a little bit different, but as you know, Bill, I want my PNC president to meet you at your plays so that she can begin to grow an understanding of what is around in her community as well, that we can connect people to. The other example is my school will never have an arts centre, beautiful glossy thing. why should it when I can put my students on the fleet of school bikes, they can ride down to visit Monica at the Belconnen Arts Centre, and she'll say, yes, use this gallery, use this place, we're experts, we love children, when you come we can spot talents and gifts here. So I think it's relationships again, and it's to do with, the key is us brokering relationships and connectors, because in the Canberra community things are so accessible.
I think just to add to reiterate that, when the things that children said to us, they did talk about services that were available in their community. They talked about hospitals and so on, but they didn't talk about their need for services per se. They talked about caring people, the relationships, the connections they made. And so I think we're thinking about these things from children's points of view. It's not about the kind of service, it's about the way you can foster those relationships and connectedness, so children feel that that's their place, that they can go, that they can reach out. And I think in Australia we've often had models where the services are there for a deficit. So, you know, for a young person to go maybe to a youth centre and say, oh, that's not me, because I don't actually have a problem. So it's how do you build the inclusiveness? So it's like, I go there because this is my community and I'm connected. And then if I've got something I need, I've got people who care about me. So I think that's the kind of the thinking shift that we need to explore.
I think we're really struggling with the concept of communities, or the function of communities. Schools are school communities. They can be totally divorced from the physical community in which they live. And this is increasingly so with the distribution of schools now. And it is a worry, because I mean, children and their families can get far more easily lost in this and not picked up, particularly if you have practices in the school which don't get to know the families. And I think I get particularly concerned about the children who have a very long day at school, might be before school care, a long day at school, after school care, and the before and after school care often delivered by different people. Who in this group of people does a troubled child see as the person they can talk to? Does that person see them as a child that needs talking to? And how is this transmitted to the family? I think it is a very chancy and problematical thing, and particularly for children who are more introverted, less and more reluctant to say that, or probably at the other end, the ones who are just out there and driving everybody crazy, and nobody wonders why. But I don't think there is generally enough connected community structure to really help these children. And I think the sort of school initiative to help the school look to the community is one way of going. I think sort of my dream that if you ring and make a notification, the response to the notification is, what can you continue to do to help, and who else can you think of that might help? And it's that sort of action which is going to get a more connected community. It's not all a one-on-one and handing it on to someone.
That's right. Carolyn, just before we have your question, I'm aware it's getting later in the day. I will be asking people who stay till the end to fill in an evaluation, but if you have to go beforehand, please can you fill in an evaluation and leave it before you go. Carolyn, thank you.
I just wanted to ask your thoughts around, I guess it comes down to body image for young children, probably the 11 and 12. When we were at the first symposium, at the beginning of the year, one of the graphs I remember graphically showed that the big push in body image concerns with young people. And my particular concern is that we are weighing and measuring young people in school environments, which goes against the Eating Disorders Coalition, and strongly recommend that we don't do that under any circumstance. And then we had a government kind of commitment to introduce weighing and measuring to students in year 6 or 7 in the last election. And while I understand the need for demographers to have this kind of information, is it necessary to weigh and measure every child? Is that the way to manage obesity? What are your thoughts around that?
my immediate reaction to that, and this is not an area that I've done research in, but my immediate reaction to that is obesity is a serious problem in the Australian community across age groups. Would we countenance the idea of adults being weighed and measured at work once a year to try to deal with the obesity epidemic? And I think if someone had an election campaign of that kind, there'd be an outcry. So why would we subject children to something that's likely to be seen as punitive and humiliating when we wouldn't do it to adults? And so I think there are much better ways of of reinforcing positive behaviours than that kind of strategy.
Sharon, you nailed it.
Can I just off the topic slightly, but I heard a term in Iceland. I was talking with the Human Rights Commission about the sexualisation of children and young people. She stopped and said she doesn't like the term sexualisation of children and young people. She prefers the term pornographisation of children and young people. And I like that straight away. She said, one, because if you say sexualisation, you're removing the capacity of young people to have sexuality appropriately. And most of the sexualisation that occurs in children and young people is actually borders on pornography or is inappropriate. So.
I was just interested in your comments on the comment from the Scandinavian countries, and I can't remember which country it was, where they built on passions, children's passions. And I work in an occupational therapy student-led clinic at UC. We have a lot of children referred to us who have difficulties with learning, have writing skills or gross and fine motor development, or have difficulty managing behaviour in the classroom, that kind of issue. But I think so often the focus is on the negative things, and a lot of those children I see come in and they're really good at something, but so often the focus is on all the things they can't do. And we find that even just with a couple of sessions with them where we're focusing on them achieving and, you know, there's lots of positive reinforcement and talking about what they're interested in, what they like, you just have an attitude change, because we're not doing that much. You know, we've had 2 sessions with a child and the parents will come back and say, oh, he's doing so much better in class. Now it's really not really, you know, because we've really helped them with their writing, or because, you know, we haven't had that much time. So I'm interested in your comments on what are we doing in the school system to develop children's passions, focus on their strengths, and sort of rather than the deficits model.
So again, I can talk from my school, and I was saying outside at Macquarie, there are 3 kinds of inquiry happening at any time in our classrooms. One is a shared inquiry where we're guiding students through a process, and there's content going on, but it's process, and this is how we're getting inquirers. Another is personalised inquiry time, where they do pick up a passion and work with that. Our teachers, we have a way that we've propelled the personalised learning agenda is I'm doing exactly the same for my staff as for my students. So they are researchers, thinkers, collaborators, inquirers around an area of professional passion, interest or need. And they are reviewing literature and thinking and wondering. Tomorrow night we have an annual nano conference based on the 3-minute thesis that universities run. A quick presentation, 5 to 10 minutes, where their learning is at. So that's exactly what happens for students in personal inquiry. But the third element is the spontaneous inquiry, which is when those real things happen, when there was a problem with children's lunch going missing in the Year 4-5 corridor, and the amazingly skilled teacher says, right, let's inquire into this. I'm wondering, is it ever okay to steal? And when these 8 and 9-year-olds start saying, but if the baby is really sick and the mother can't afford the medicine, maybe that's okay. You know, so 3 kinds of inquiry, absolutely passion, focus on the positives and strengths, and that helps teachers to see also the window into the child about what they like.
I'll just make a comment that I think it's off on a tangent a little bit from your question, but I think there's one of the things that we hear from children is they often feel under so much pressure to achieve. So it's not just the doing something for the passion of it or the enjoyment of it, even if you're actually pretty awful, it's this sense of I have to do well, I have to be the best. And children are measured and monitored, not just in terms of weight and height, but in all kinds of things all the time. And often the message is, it's not about following the passion, it's about achievement. And I think that's something that's really problematic because, part of inquiry is getting it wrong.
Yeah,
It's not doing the best. And just learning from that. And so I think that's something that we really need to be paying attention to. And I think this does feed into the social media question as well. The social media, I think, can be a real force for positives in children's lives. But there is an area of social media that is about presenting your life as perfect. About particular images. I'm always looking fabulous. I've always done well at school. I'm always good at sport. And that sends out really problematic messages to children about what you need to be in order to be a success. So I think
in order to be properly loved.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And parents are often under pressure too to demonstrate that their children are high achievers. So I think that's something that we really need to reflect on. How
And
do
parents do
children
it again themselves in the constructs of their,
It's not helped by the formal acknowledgement in things like that plan, which are very much focused on measurable achievements, which I consider them the tools. They're not where you end up. They're things that help you get there. But I think it's increasingly hard being a child. But I agree with you with the passion part. There's a very good book sort of searching for the child's element or passion, the thing that they really enjoy most or are best at. And if somehow in their life, maybe in school, maybe at home, you give them the opportunity to just explore that more comfortably, not with the pressure to achieve, it improves the rest of their life too.
So just back to the arts centre example though too, when you work with grown-ups, with specialisations, bring in the community, they will spot some things that teachers don't have on their radar about talents and gifts too, that maybe the family didn't know, that people who are experts in a field do. Did you know that child, that pitch that they're singing, this sort of stuff. So again, another need for the grown-ups, and a whole lot of them. Teachers won't always cut that because we're through our own lens and paradigm and experiences. So working with the community again, the more volunteers we have, the more families, parents we connect with our schools, universities.
Sorella? Yeah.
I don't know if I should raise this at the very end of the day, but just something that hasn't come up in this forum, that came up in the forum earlier in the year, and just an observation from those of us in the community sector, is the prevalence of anxiety and depression increasing amongst younger people in those middle years. I don't know if any of you have any comments from your research or thinking about what might be contributors and what might be helpful for young people in those middle years around those issues. As I say, big questions.
Labels are really important, and it's really good that we have them. And sometimes people's perception of what is it depression? Or am I a little person who's feeling deep sadness for a little while as a first and coming to terms with all of that? I always, labels are very important, but I always dig deep with them, because language like, my child's being bullied, will roll off the parents, and you say, hang on. Yes, it can happen, I get it, but what do you mean? Usually it's that child said something that he didn't like. Is it bullying? Maybe, but maybe not as well. So we talked a little while ago about educators as sense makers, as well, and there is a role in not dismissing something, but also normalising and understanding continuums of emotional responses and the part that we can all play, again, as a community in helping to let people be in the pit for how long they need to, but also, okay, and this is what we do, to move forward.
I think I've said this before, because I'm not sure relationships are the panacea to everything, but I think they're fairly important. You know, and I think part of this is around connectedness and what relationships young people have to support them through those times. I think the point is a really important one, that not everything is anxiety, not everything is depression. Sometimes it's just the way we feel at that moment. But if we're alone in that moment, and that moment becomes an hour and a day and a week without someone to support us out, it's like, it's okay to feel sad.
Yeah.
You know, it's okay to cry, it's okay to feel angry. It's just when it's all the time that it becomes an issue. But if you're a 10-year-old and you're feeling like that and you're alone and you've got no one to help you move out of that, to distract you, to give you other things to do, then it does become a serious issue. And in our research, I think the young people, or the children who talked about having real issues in their lives were generally those who were really disconnected, who didn't have anyone to turn to. So mum and dad weren't there for whatever reason. There were no neighbours, there were no grandparents, there was just no one to turn to and support them out of it. The young people who talked most positively about their lives were the ones who had lots of networks around them. So if mum and dad were being a bit of a pain, as mums and dads can be, I'm told, you know, there was someone else. There was the nice lady next door who made the muffins and played the board game, or you know, there was someone else in the community that they could connect with and talk to about.
It's the same. We will have days and weeks and longer when we feel sad for no particular reason. And we know how much it helps if you have a couple of friends who have coffee, or just some nice social interaction can totally turn you around. And kids are precisely the same. And they're more so in that they're learning about their feelings, and they're learning what feelings are okay and not okay. And it's the response from people around them that helps them better sort these out. And a little bit of social interaction goes a long way to help things feel a lot better.
And I think following on when you said I agree, language creates reality, and in no way am I saying that young people don't experience anxiety and depression in the real sense, whatever that means. I'm not saying that at all. But with language creating reality, the media catastrophising what it is to be anxious or depressed, I think it's very easy for a young person to feel, or anyone for that matter, to feel, I'm feeling sad, therefore I must be anxious, therefore I must cut myself up, or therefore I must do this or this or this, and kind of take on the defined role which is ascribed to people who are anxious. And please, I'm in no way downplaying the significant problem of anxiety and depression we have in Australia, but there's a lot of kids out there who may think or act as if they're anxious, depressed, or very much.
And because if used imprecisely, that language can very quickly see us pouring many resources into things that simply needs connecting, managing, you know, in different ways.
Yeah, Wendy, I think that's really interesting what you say. My recollection is that one of the things that George Patton was saying and Joe Redman was echoing is about not labelling at this age, that it is a lot of issues are just maybe in their infancy and they're not full blown, they don't need a label, but they do need relationship, they do need listening, they do need intervention at that stage. They need adults around who are caring, who are interested.
And modelling for their peers, this is how we do it in a community.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. So I said I'd tell you the bit that you confided to me that you said you missed out on. You said, what about the kid who hates going to school?
Yeah. So I'm also thinking now about this, we hear more and more about jobs and unemployment rates. And it's more or less getting to the point you say you have a job, stop complaining. And even if it's a job you find distressing and traumatic, you feel guilty about it being distressing and traumatic, kids are in an even worse position. You're that age, you have to go to school. You have no choice. There can be many reasons for you being very, very unhappy. And the thought, and I guess seeing children and having worse lives, I saw a lot of children. I think we underestimate enormously the bravery of these children actually fronting up to school each day, knowing they were likely to fail in many aspects of the day, knowing they didn't have friends, knowing that it was bewildering and confusing and distressing, and that they had to come back again the next day. I don't think if these kids are quiet, we don't pay attention, it's a very good reason to be outrageous, because then you get suspended. Thank God it stops it all for a while. And I think neither way is addressing the problem, and I think it is a very, very significant problem. And I think we need to have somebody with a good enough relationship with their child to gently and over time find out just what is behind this very genuine and terrible despair about being in this place. We just take it for granted, you'll be all right when you get there, go off, everybody goes to school. And I feel we're doing the same with jobs for adults. When we say, shut up, you've got a job, get out and enjoy it.
The difference with, I agree, the difference between jobs and adults and children going to school and children have told me this for years, is that on most jobs are reasonably safe, and there's a huge amount, there's legislation, there's OHS legislation which prescribes the number of toilets, the lighting, the lifts, the temperature, everything in the building, and the slightest thing goes wrong, the OHS person comes in and shuts it down. But we ask kids to go routinely into buildings that are cold, hot, chairs are scratchy, the toilets are filthy, there's offensive graffiti, we provide places, racist, sexist stuff that none of us tolerate at all on our daily environment at school. And we would be horrified if we had that kind of exposure within our workplace, but we expect kids to do it day in, day out. I'm not taking out all schools, as many schools are wonderful, but they're really frequently uncomfortable places. You know?
Not even
kids
the right size
shuffled off
furniture.
in boiling heat over summer, they sit like cattle in paddocks, waiting until lunch comes and exist.
Oh, it's like when in the world do you sit with 28 bodies in small rooms?
Yeah.
It's quite bizarre. when you think
Every
about
public
what
servant
people
gets
are
their
doing.
8 square feet of a fan.
Probably use that playground.
Yeah, that's why we went for a bigger room.
Yeah.
So rad.
And it's probably
So OHS should apply for schools. The OHS legislation should apply for schools.
it's probably important to realise that it's actually not a small minority.
Yeah.
So I haven't spoken about it today, but for the last 4 years I've been working with the Royal Commission, talking to kids about safety and their perceptions of safety in institutions. And about 80-90% of the kids we spoke to said that they had been bullied to an extent where they had real fears for their well-being and where the emotional impact was quite significant. And they rightly said, if it happened in a workplace, the workplace would be sued. But it happens every day and no one does anything, and I know that you're doing well at your school, but with due respect, schools are still failing to create organisational cultures that don't facilitate that type of behaviour. Kids said it's the second thing. Their second main concern in schools was adults who bully kids, adults who use their power over children, and they often talked about the school context. We didn't talk about home like Sharon did in her study, but there were lots of adults around that intimidated kids and harassed kids and made them feel difficult. So there was a group, in fact, in our online survey of 1,500 kids, I think 15% of the 13 to 15-year-olds said that they didn't feel safe at school. And smaller numbers, in fact, I'm quite devastated having spent a lot of time in school. Most kids, and it's not surprising developmentally in lots of ways, said that they wouldn't turn to someone at school for help, that they'd have to rely on their peers and on their parents and potentially their siblings. So we've got to think about how we're creating positive cultures. It's really exciting to hear where schools are doing it well, but I don't think I'm speaking out of school to say that probably more schools are somewhat caustic for kids than safe schools.
And it goes beyond the culture, it's also the physical structure. So we're still not building schools for children.
I did say to Will, my eldest son was bullied for a time at high school in the ACT. He didn't tell me about it until about 4 years later, though I knew he was very unhappy. And about the 4 years later, he said, "Oh, well, it was a good training for the public service." He's that sort of kid.
Sue mentioned it before that. It's not what happens, because the tricky thing is when we're working with young learners who are living in and breathing in and learning about the culture, we're developing a culture with people learning about to do a culture. So the adults and grown-ups, very critical. The relationship with families, because it is normal, absolutely appropriate that a little child being tucked in bed or a teenager at the end of the day will download to an adult at home differently. But I say to my families, I need to know that, because then we can work on that. Yeah. So it is in the adult modelling around them, being very careful about how we're labelling and how we're sense making. What's the narrative around that? It's a complex thing.
And I know you want to wind up, but and the bullying, I mean, it really irritates me when bullying is always seen as a problem that only involves children and young people. Whenever the word bullying comes up, Campbell Times always talks about school. Bullying exists in the community where they learn it from. Parents bully each other, politicians routinely bully each other, sports people bully each other all the time. And we just go, oh, well, it's a kid's problem. And a lot of what happens to kids is labelled bullying. A lot of what happens to kids and is called bullying is physical or sexual assault. This kind of blanket term that, oh, it's just bullying.
I'd like to make a comment on this as well quickly, because I know we need to move it. I think, schools range from doing wonderful and amazing things through to really being pretty negative places for children. There's a whole spectrum, and often there's a whole spectrum within a school. But schools are institutions. They're designed or were originally designed for a particular purpose, and I think we often think that schools and children go together and we connect them necessarily. But I think we also need to think about children's lives outside of school, and I think there are two issues there. We can't expect schools to do everything, and we can't expect schools to pick up on everything that the rest of society is failing on. And I think we also need to think about, what we heard from children was whether school is good or bad, it's still an institution and it's still one part of their lives and not the entirety of their lives. And often when we've talked about building relationships, the response is, yes, because if you can build good relationships between children and teachers, that's good. Well, there's no doubt that that's a good thing. But children, one boy put it beautifully when we were talking about the relationship between children and teachers, when he said, well, the teachers, I'm not sure if they're part of our community because they come here to work and then at night they go home. But we live here and this is our community around here. So they're different. They're not really part of our community. And I don't think any of us would necessarily think our boss is our community or that the boss is the only person we'd go to if we had a problem. So I think schools are fundamentally important, but I think we have to think about children's lives much more holistically than just being about school.
Education versus schooling.
And I think that's a great way, a holistic picture, because that's been such a theme today, right from the beginning to the end.